Hello, I'm Kathy Aston, and I'm here with another edition of Books in the World, a program produced by Cape Cod Writers Center. And we're here today talking with Robin Farnsworth, who wrote a memoir entitled The Greater Weight of Glory. Robin's story surrounds the death of her 21-year-old son, Spencer. Let me read you the back of the cover that actually will explain how poignant her moment of finding out about that death was. That's my son. 3 words that swept away everything familiar from Robin Farnsworth's life. An emergency nurse at work one night, she identifies the young man on the ER stretcher. Spencer, her 21-year-old son, was the unintended target of a murder. A voice within her asks, "Will you forgive his killers?" And so the journey begins. Robin's story is one of forgiveness and faith, and she's here today to talk about her memoir. Robin, could you tell us a little bit about that terrible night in 2002 when Spencer was murdered?
Yeah, sure. So I worked in the emergency room at Cape Cod Hospital then, and we got a call that they were bringing in 2 stabbing victims, very, very seriously injured. And then en route, one of them was upgraded to a code 99, which meant no vital signs. And I took what they called the trauma room, where they brought him in. And because of where I stood, I was actually assigned to be the scribe nurse, where, my job was really just to document on a huge form, standing next to a table. I didn't have a great view of what was going on, and he was worked on for about 15 minutes and pronounced dead. And then,
and all this time, you did not know?
No, I had no idea. And then when they took his wallet out of his jeans, I saw his name on some of the identification in the wallet. And I knew after seeing his name, I had to walk over to the stretcher and take a look.
It's an amazing, amazing story. When you talk about writing a memoir, it is completely different than a novel in that it's your bare story. Reading this memoir, I was completely transfixed with how raw and honest your description of your life was, your description of Spencer's life, Spencer's mission, the death itself, and how it affected everyone around Spencer and everyone around you and your family. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, first of all, about what type of man Spencer was. I know that he made a huge impact in his community, and I know that being murdered at such a young age impacts everyone.
Yeah. Cape Cod is a small community in that sense. He, as I detail in the book, he, kind of grew into sort of a rebellious teenager. And I would say, when he was a child, probably around age 7, I sort of did this amazing turnaround in my life where I had given my life to Christ and sort of, started raising them different because of that. And, he and his brother were definitely drawn to that, but they both kind of did their little rebellious turnaround as teenagers. So he was, everything Spencer did, he did with an intensity. So when he was bad with an intensity. Yeah. And it wasn't until he was around 16 or 17 when his life really sort of started spiraling in the wrong direction that I felt like God was really getting a hold of him. And when Spencer made that decision to really surrender his life to Christ, there was just such a tangible, amazing change in him. He was just transformed into this really peaceful guy, just gentle, really loving individual. But he had a very, very rare intensity in his walk. And Anyone who knew him those last years of his life remember him always inviting old friends out to church, and he was intense. He really was. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like he was. I mean, reading this, I was actually struck by how interactive your early years were with the type of years that he had. I know that his death wasn't the first death that affected you in your life. With your brother Timothy, was it Tim?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And you were just a young girl when your parents came home and said that he had died. He had died suddenly from was it a heart?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then how that affected your family. And your family, could you tell me about the circumstances? It seems like your father and mother somewhat fell apart.
Yeah,
to
totally.
some extent.
Yeah, and that's, I felt I really couldn't tell this whole story without really going back to that time in 1964 when I was 8 years old, my brother Timmy was 9, and we were really like best friends because I was sort of this acting out kind of kid, and he was sort of like my stability, you know, and he died suddenly. It was an unseen cardiac issue with him, and that event just totally blew my family apart. We were this very normal 60s unit, and my dad spiraled quickly into alcoholism, and my mom really mental illness. And my siblings and I just sort of fended for ourselves in a way, and we all kind of acted out in different ways.
Well, another thing that struck me about reading this memoir was how honest you were with your own faults. You didn't dress it up, you didn't make it look like a pretty life, but you also you were culpable with your own, the choices that you made, even as a young adult, even as a young mother. It was somewhat bearing, but also refreshing to see that you weren't trying to pretend that anything was other than
sort of a mess.
Well, I have to say, when you talk about pulling somebody up by their bootstraps, I want to say that's what you did for yourself.
Yeah.
In the midst of the chaos that your upbringing provided for you after your brother died.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about was about the journey of writing something so personal. Did you set out to write this memoir?
I did. I knew it was a story that really had to be told. I think I had to wait. It's been 16 years since my son died. I started to sort of piece it together maybe about 8 years ago, but really wasn't ready. Things weren't coming together, so then I put it up on a shelf again, and I would say maybe around 2015, took it out, and honestly, it really just flowed. I said, I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm not going to stop until the end. That was just the way I write, and it was a very messy first draft, but I really, when you read the book, you sort of realize it's really a bunch of little stories.
Vignettes. Yes, definitely. And I kind of liked that format where we were going into Spencer's life and his, actually it starts with a bang with the pivotal incident. And so you're drawn into this story immediately. And then after you get to see where you're at there, we're swung right back to 64. And the things that formed you as a person, which allowed you to take this journey without losing your mental health and without diving into alcoholism for yourself. When I say that I was struck, I read your story on Christmas Day in a quiet moment in my house. I couldn't put it down. And I know that one of the reviews that you got was from Dr. Nate Rudman, who's an emergency room physician at Cape Cod Hospital. And one of the things that he wrote about it, which is how I felt as well, was that the book was impossible to put down. And it was an important book for both Christians and non-Christians to read because the message is universal. And that, I do want to talk about your message because it's a distinct message where you were called to the Lord at a certain point in your life where you were at the lowest. You had 2 children?
At that time,
At
yes.
that time, 2
Yes.
children, and you had been living in a variety of different situations that were
Yes.
probably less than
Oh, yeah.
ideal.
Yep.
And was it one thing? Was it one moment, or was it a series of moments that led you to go in that direction?
I would say, when you look back, you can almost see, sometimes I describe it as if God were putting sort of channel markers out to kind of get me to sort of come into harbor. So I can look back and see where there were definitely significant small events that were kind of pointing me in that direction. I think I was certainly an alcoholic, and at age 29, just hitting the wall and realizing and really feeling like God was showing me, you know what, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And you're going to leave your boys without a mom. And it was such a such a powerful event that that was it since
Right.
that day. That was 32 years ago. And then it took another 2 years, I think, for me to really realize how miserable I was as a human being and how I was not going to be my own answer, for me to realize that I really needed Jesus Christ as my answer. And it was a beautiful homecoming.
Yeah.
It really was.
Well, let's talk about what actually transpired immediately after your son immediately after he died, immediately after you realized it was him. And you heard a voice asking if you would forgive his killers. And this was before you knew who his killers were,
Right.
what the circumstances were, or how he had died. Actually, if you could tell us all how he did die, like the specifics around the actual, I know that the ER was where you saw it, but he had gone to help out a friend or had gone to a friend's house. Is this?
Yeah, he was not. There had, I guess, been a party fight, just young men at a party had kind of gone back and forth. Spencer was not involved in any of it. And then they had come back to this apartment to kind of regroup, and, there was like retaliation. And Spencer was the one who in fact said, don't do it, just let it go. And they were like, no, we got to, so there was another fight, and I guess that stirred a group of guys to get really angry and arm themselves and come back actually searching for a young man who had just left this apartment.
Oh, okay.
And these kids arrived and actually broke a door down, and Spencer was sleeping upstairs and heard this horrific noise and rushed downstairs and just started pulling the attackers off a young man who was being attacked, and they in turn turned on him, and he died from a stab wound. Yeah, to the heart.
And then what's your relationship with those young men now, today, after all these years? Do you still have a relationship with either of them? Well, I know that one of the people involved wasn't there at the actual stabbing. His friend Jake, who was a catalyst to some of this.
Oh, Jermaine, you mean?
Oh, Jermaine,
Yes,
excuse me.
that's okay.
Excuse me, I will.
That's okay.
I apologize.
Yes, yeah, Jermaine, he was the intended victim, target. And he had called me 1 or 2 days after Spencer died and basically said, it's my fault, And so I told him I forgave him, but I said, please come to the memorial service. You need to know God's forgiveness. You need to know a greater, because the burden he was carrying. So Jermaine at the service ended up giving his life to Christ and totally turning his life around to the point where he several years later became a pastor. So yeah, we still are definitely in touch. He lives in North Providence now. He goes to a church there, married with a bunch of kids. Yeah, so.
And then when you were writing this, and it became clear that you had a memoir, and it was important to you to get out this message, and important to get out not a message just for Spencer, but for yourself. Tell me I mean, I have my own ideas about the greater weight of glory, but tell me what went into the title, what went into the idea of what you were putting together with this memoir. Because it struck
Right.
me the way that the Shack might have struck some people when they read that for the first time.
Yeah.
Or other epiphany novels, not memoirs, but novels where you say to yourself, okay, this is where strength comes from. This
Yeah.
is where strength comes from. It's
Yeah.
not from me. So
Yeah.
tell me about your title.
It was really important for me to try to show people, because over the years I get, oh, you're so strong, or you're so brave, or you're so, and it was really important for me to show people that that strength does not come from me. That strength is something that is found in who God is in a very personal way. And I think the title is actually drawn from the Bible. It's a scripture where the Apostle Paul, who suffered horribly, said, "But for our light affliction, there is working in a greater weight of glory, an eternal weight of glory." So it's kind of like the scales, God's scales. You look at someone like me who, lost a son to murder, and then even a few years later diagnosed with cancer and everything, and you're just like, oh my goodness, But when you focus on who God is, and He's so faithful to be there every single step and meet you in such very personal, powerful ways, that as you sort of walk down this road in this really difficult journey, I mean, I don't think I make it out to be anything other than
there's
a very...
nothing about this memoir that says, I found God and then my life was easy.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not. And
Yeah.
this life is not easy. I think for most of us, it's not in some ways. But when you begin to set your eyes on who He is, it's almost like the scale just starts to slowly tip. And He started to really show me sort of an eternal perspective of life here on earth, that this is really a very short piece of eternity. And when I started to look at where Spencer was and who Spencer was, and that there's a bigger plan a lot of times in all of this. And do I understand it all? No, I do not, but I have peace in just knowing who He is.
Well, it's an amazing story of being a strong person as you were able to be. Anyway, just to get yourself to a point where you could take your early life and use every single moment to create the life that you have now, and not be ashamed of your early life or looking back on it as anything other than the blessing that it was to have all of these experiences to lead you to that. Have you been able to bring yourself to go back to the emergency room? Are you working as a nurse now?
I've been working as a nurse since then. I tried to go back. I talk about it in the book. They were very kind to me. I really didn't have what it really takes to be a good ER nurse anymore. It was difficult, especially going near the trauma room was tough. And it's a whole new ER there now.
Right.
But I really felt like God wanted me to just close that door. And I've done a lot of different types of nursing since then, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then have the response that you've had from this memoir, has any one thing stood out to you when people approach you and talk about your story, or when now you must be so, I mean, does it make you raw when there's a shooting? Do you feel like it brings you right back to all those years ago when you have to watch or deal with all the things happening to the youth?
I think that there's still certain things that are difficult for me, but I think overall it's given me, I'm very comfortable walking into someone else's pain. And I think that's a gift that God has given me through this, that no matter what someone's going through, I am comfortable stepping into that with them. And I think that's a tremendous blessing, because one of the things that was really painful for me was how isolating it is.
Right.
your son is murdered. It freaks people out, you know.
Right.
And but yeah, like the shooting that we just had in Florida. I mean, right away I thought, there's 17 mothers
Right.
that are feeling right now the way that, you know, and my heart just really breaks for them. You know, it doesn't
absolutely.
really traumatize me. It just really, the sorrow. You know.
When you say your first draft was a mess, was it was it basically in the format that we see it, where it goes back and forth, and or was there one story that you wrote and then interspersed the pieces of your early life into it?
No, it basically is pretty much what you see as far as the general framework. It was that first powerful chapter of what happened in the ER, and then jumping back to 1964. It wasn't difficult to pick out which stories for some reason. It really just flowed in that way. There were some kind of major edits that I had to do just to kind of clarify what I was talking about. But yeah, no, the framework was pretty much
So
there
how
from the
comfortable were
beginning.
you writing initially? Did you feel like it was?
Some of the stuff you can actually find on my website. I've been blogging since 2011.
Oh, good.
And blogging is a great form of writing, I feel, because it's one of my strengths is writing very short stories, little vignette type of things, and kind of drawing something out of them.
Right.
So, like my chapter on my dog, Rosie
Right.
the rescue dog, was most of that is a blog that I wrote years ago. So I was able to pull a little bit from.
I know. And how soon after Spencer's death did you get Rosie?
Like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. To
Rosie
the
really
point
was a rescue
where-
dog.
Yeah. My son Jake he just announced he wanted a guard dog. He was 9. And I thought he was, you know, had overheard some of the, you know, details of Spencer's death, the violence and everything. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. Yes, of course.
Right.
We'll get you this dog who ended up being the worst guard dog ever. And she was an awesome dog.
Oh, that's
but
what he had in mind, somebody to protect us.
he wanted a ferocious guard dog. Well, it turns
Yeah.
out he only told me a few years ago when he read that blog, he said, Mom, it wasn't Spencer's death. It was actually I was watching scary movies in a neighbor's house. So, but anyway, the dog was really for me because she really, she helped me get up every morning. I had to run out of the house with her and just walk and. Wow. Yes.
And how long had you had been remarried before this all happened?
Yes.
Yes.
Only about maybe 4 years.
4
I was
years.
remarried. Yeah.
So, I mean, all of this must take its toll as well on any personal relationship, your children, your
yeah.
husband, all of that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, studies really show the death of a child really puts a huge strain on a marriage. And this is, again, another one of the ways, and I'm not going to say that it's not hard, because it is hard, but again, when you have a reference point of knowing who God is through Christ, it's, and my husband and I have always had that, thank God, that was really an anchor, that when everything was just totally crazy and this storm hit, we had something holding us.
Right. So, and then your particular, your other two children have created a bigger family for you with a lot more richness too.
Yeah, for sure.
That the birth of any child is always a hopeful event.
Yeah.
But you had said in the memoir that your
Granddaughter.
No, I was thinking about your son who did a lot of the editing or helped you with that. Was he your first reader, or who read this for you first?
Oh yeah, Miles, my English teacher's son. I really needed him.
Yeah.
I do acknowledge him and my brother Bob, who's also a writer. They were definitely my editors, the people that I trusted most. Miles probably more, being maybe the closest person besides me to Spencer, and it was important to me to get it right, to really be very honest about who he was.
I feel you did get it right. When I say, and I had also written a review for Lit Lovers for this particular memoir, and but one of the things that drew me to it is a topic that is so horrifying a topic that every parent would want to stay away from, I came away with a sense of lightness that I didn't expect to have.
Yeah.
And I commend you for that. Even, aside from your personal belief system, I commend you for being able to transfer that into this work. And I know that there were a lot of things that when you did little phrases or scripture, you would put phrases that Spencer had been the author of, not just things that were out of a Bible or things that were other authors' work. And one of them, which is at the very end, which I absolutely loved. And when did you find this? Was it after his death that you had found this?
Yes, he kept a lot of journals, which was great because he loved to write. Yeah.
Well, there's one that he's written, Our Hope. And I just think it's such a wonderful message. But our hope is what is hidden, not seen with the human eye, is promised to the forgiven from a God who does not lie. We hope for what we do not see. This gives us hope itself. The present cannot dictate what lies beyond our death, so we will not grow weary when all we had is lost. Our treasure cannot be worked for. Only Jesus paid its cost. So when vanity and emptiness overwhelm us with despair, we praise God for his promises with hands raised in the air. The fact that he left you these type of inspirational words to help get you through this is just a testimony to who he is and who he was and who continues to be.
Yes.
I also want to say that for anyone who is looking to read this, the reviews on it are amazing. I feel like everyone gets something different out of it. You'll come to this story with your own story. We're so happy that you came here today to talk to us. This book can be found, where is it that you actually are? It's local bookstores, local to Cape Cod.
Yes, in
and
Cape
then
Cod.
it is on Amazon.
Amazon.
It can be read on Kindle.
Yep.
So this book is available. Also, Robin has a website, which is
spencersmom.com.
spencersmom.com, and so you can also purchase the book through that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Robin. This was great.
Yeah.